Hey everyone, I'm going to get started in just a minute or two, let people continue to join in. Get this bot party started here. Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Jonathan Wood, a software consultant here at Wintellect, and I will be showing you how to be a bot builder with the Microsoft Bot Framework. And feel free to reach me anytime on Twitter at jwood. And if you haven't heard of Wintellect, we are a training and consulting company. For our training, we have traditional instructor-led training in classrooms, but we also have on-demand video training with our Wintellect Now offering. But we've also put our knowledge into books, over 30 of them, in fact. And if you've been in the .NET space any, you're probably familiar with the CLR via C# book from Jeffrey Ritter. And even some of our consultants are authors as well. And just a couple of highlights about our accomplishments. We are a Microsoft Gold Partners in Cloud Platform, DevOps, and Data Platform, as well as the 2018 IAMCP Gold Partner of the Year Worldwide winner. And so what we're going to go over today is a little bit of the what and why of chatbots, and then a couple of the chatbot use cases, and then we'll go straight into the Microsoft Bot Framework and why you would want to use that as opposed to some of the other frameworks out there. And then a couple of the bot framework concepts to help get started building your bots, a couple of ways to show how to test your bot, and then a few ways to extend your bot. And so you can add some of that artificial intelligence to your bot. And maybe some people probably won't think they're talking to a bot, and they'll think they're talking to a real person. We'll have a couple of demos near the end there, and then I'll end on some resources where you can learn some more, and then we'll do some question and answering at the end. All right, so we'll get started and go straight into the what and why of chatbots. So officially, a chatbot is software that will automatically engage with the received message. And I want to highlight the keyword here, engage. And it's not really a chatbot if it can't engage with the user. So that is, if the user asks the bot a question, it has to respond with an appropriate answer. You know, you can't ask it a question and it give back gibberish. It won't help the user at all anyway. And with a piece of software being able to engage with the user, you can imagine there are quite a lot of use cases for it. And a couple of examples of those use cases are where it can help you make reservations, whether it's for a hotel, flight, or a car rental. It can be informative, and it can give you the latest news or the weather specific to what you ask, such as you can give it a location or a news category. The bots are going to be good at customer service queries, and it will allow users to ask things such as the status of their orders, prices on products, and the bot can even give the users personalized recommendations on what products they may want to look at next. It can help with some location-based queries, such as where the nearest hotel, or for example, where the nearest Italian restaurant is to where they currently are. And it can also help with answering basic questions that are in a website or services frequently asked questions. So those are all kind of business related use cases. Bots are also good for kind of specific needs that people may need or want. And I want to highlight one of my favorite examples of this, and it's a bot called Pounce, and that's a screenshot of it there here. And this was an interesting story that I'll always remember on NPR called Summer Melt. And it was first created for Georgia State to help with onboarding new college students. And it helped answer students' questions about applying for housing and registering for classes. But one of the main things that it helped them do was it let the students ask questions about their financial aid status. And in the NPR story, there was one student that they interviewed who would have, I think, actually missed out on financial aid if it weren't for the help that he got from the bot. So even though this bot was specific to the students of Georgia State, you can see how it can still have an impact and how similar bots like this can be used to, just help people out instead of just being for business needs. And before we continue, got a quick poll for y'all. Let's see. So have y'all interacted with a bot before? I'm sure most of y'all probably have, but there could be some cases where you probably didn't know that you did, but you actually did. So yeah, most of y'all have, and those bots that you interacted with, you can probably, there's a good chance you can recreate those within the bot framework here. So that'll be something interesting to play around with after this webinar. All right, so why would you want to use the bot framework? Now, there are a couple of things I think really that the bot framework has for you that I don't think any of the other ones can do. One of the things that it has some really good SDKs, and they have them for several languages, including C# and JavaScript on Node. And that is on version 3, which I'll actually be covering version 3 of the bot framework. And the main reason for that is there is a version 4. It is out in preview. But because of that, and they mentioned this in the documentation too, that Microsoft still recommends to use version 3 for production use. And I wanted to make sure and go over that in case you want to actually get something out in production pretty quick. But in version 4, they do have other languages coming, such as Python and I think Java as well. You can integrate the bot into multiple channels, and the channels are going to be something such as Skype, Slack, or Facebook Messenger. And this is actually great since we can write the bot once and then run in multiple places. And we can also connect to our own applications using what they call a direct line channel. And we connect the channels in Azure, so we don't need to have any API knowledge of the channels that we need to connect it with. And speaking of Azure, we can easily deploy the bot to Azure, and the bot's going to be deployed as a web app service, because there's really nothing, there's not a new service really to learn within Azure there. And we can easily integrate the artificial intelligence to make your bot much more intelligent. And we'll hit on a bit of this later on in the slides on the things that you can do there. So a couple of the bot framework concepts. There are 2 core concepts that you'll interact with the most within the bot framework. And those are going to be activities, which are various types of information that are communicated to the bot, and then dialogues, which is where you model the conversation flow between the bot and the user. And the bot framework can handle several types of activities. You have the message activity, which is going to be the most common type of activity where the user and the bot communicate. There are also different events where you can process services or other types of external processes that won't be visible to the user. And you can handle reactions. So if a user reacts to a message, such as clicking the like message, that they like the message, you can handle that. And you can actually put some pretty fun interactions with that, I'm sure. And there's a typing activity. And if a user is typing a message to the bot, it can also be used the other way around, where this activity can be sent to the user to indicate a request is being processed, for example. And there are a couple of other activities as well, such as if the bot was added to the contact list or when the conversation was ended. So there are quite a few options you can handle there. And then there's dialogues. And you can build simple dialogues where text can be sent back and forth, but the bot framework can give us some extra features that kind of enhances the interaction between the user. And one of these is the ability to build forms within the bot, and kind of as a way to have it ask multiple questions to get information from the user. For example, if the bot is used to let the user build their own tacos, for instance, uh, you can use a form builder to let them do that pretty easily, such as they can ask if they want a hard or soft taco, uh, what kind of meat they want, what protein, and what other toppings that they will want. And the dialogues can also be configured to save user and conversation state, either in memory or in Azure within Cosmos DB or tables inside Azure Storage. And speaking of forms, I believe that they are probably going to be a big part of most bots. So I'm going to take a few slides here and go over what the bot framework has to offer for them, at least a couple of things. And the screenshot here is a simple example of one where the bot asks what training the user wants to learn. The user gives a response and the bot fetches the results. These results, as you can probably see here, aren't just plain text. It's using what the bot framework calls hero cards. And hero cards are one of the many types within the bot framework where you can add different kind of markup elements to, such as images and buttons. Other cards will allow your bot to send things such as videos, audio, and if your bot requires authentication, there's even a sign-in card that you can use. So it's quite extensible. And to build these forms, you'll be using what's called in the bot framework the Form Builder API. And there's a lot they built into this API. So I'm going to go over a couple of things that you can use to make your forms act a bit more like forms that you would see on a web page, but it'll be within your bot. And one of these items are prompts. And this is where you can prompt a question to the user and give options that they can select. And the user can either click on one of the buttons, or they can also type it in if they want to. And whichever option is selected, the bot will go to the appropriate dialog that you have set up to continue the conversation with the user. And if you need the user to make a choice within one of these cards, you can use a choice set. And the screenshot you can see it shows as a drop down, but you also have the ability to make it kind of a multi-select if that's what you need. And you can ask confirmation questions to the user as well. If they agree to it, the form will continue, but if not, the form will just reset back. And this is mostly useful if the user is about to pay for something, which is actually also possible within the bot with Stripe. You can also perform validation on the user inputs, and this will allow for the same kind of business logic that a web form may have to be included with your bot as well, so it can follow those same types of rules. So now let's get a little bit into testing. Microsoft has an Electron app that's an emulator for your bot, so you can test with it locally, and you can point it to your bot that is running locally, but you can also point it to a production location on your bot that's hosted on Azure. And this screenshot is actually for kind of a previous version of the emulator, and it's going to be the one I'll be using in the demos. And the new version has some couple cool things in it that I'll mention in a little bit in a couple slides. But personally, I think it's a little too early in development for the new version to be usable, I think. I've noticed a couple of kind of performance issues and stuff like that. So, but you're welcome to use it if you want. And the new version here kind of has a bit of a Visual Studio Code look and feel to it. And I think that's on purpose so they can add some of the extra features to it. And one of them, which I think is the coolest feature that they added to it, is they added the ability to inspect Luis results and update that Luis model straight within the emulator. Now, if you're not familiar with LUIS, it stands for Language Understanding Intelligence Services, and it's a custom cognitive service offering that allows you to build models based on different phrases and to match up within the model that they call an intent. And once you know the intent that you will get back from the model, you can code a task based on it. So for example, if I train a LUIS model to capture a user request in which they want to create a note, for example, it will match that to the best intent, which may be called create note. And then in your code, since you know the intent is to create a note, you know what you need to do based on that from what the user said. So if the user said they want to create a note, you can code your application to create a note. And if you want to learn more about LUIS, I actually do have a webinar on this exact thing where I'll go into a lot more detail into it next month. So feel free to check that out if you want. And let's go into a bit of a demo where I'm going to show how to create and deploy a bot in C# created with the Visual Studio. And I'll do kind of a small bot. I'll test it with the emulator and then publish it to Azure. And hopefully all of that kind of works and the demo gremlins aren't going to get out to me. So first, before we do that, in order to create a bot within Visual Studio, you will need to download and install this bot builder template. And this is for version 3. They have one for version 4 as well. So you need to do that. And then once you're in Visual Studio, you can create a new project. Then in the Visual C# section here, you have this bot application. And we'll name this webinar. So this template is, I don't think it's been updated pretty recently. So I'm going to go to manage my NuGet packages here, and I'll tell it to restore. And you see they have this Microsoft Bot Builder package. And it's at 3.8. We can get the preview releases of 4.0, but I'm going to just go straight to the latest version 3 and update that. There we go. And so I want to kind of go through a little bit through the project structure here. And at start, we have this web API config, which kind of tells you that all this is just a regular API, web API. And if we go to the messages controller, all that is just a post request. And when we talked about those activities, this is where you handle those. And the first thing it handles is that message activity. And you can handle more within here as well if you need to. With that message activity, what it's going to do is going to go to what is this root dialog. And within there, all that's going to do is kind of just get the length of the text that you sent it and then post a new message based on that, the length that it calculated. And in fact, we can go ahead and run this and see what it looks like. You can see it runs on IIS Express. And there we go. And it's running. We'll see it. We get this little page to make so we know that it's running okay. And in the API here, or the emulator, I can get this location. If you see down here, we need to append this API/messages into the address bar here. And the Microsoft ID and password, since we're not running on Azure, we don't need to input that in yet. And we see it connected. Just type a message. There we go, we got a response back. And so let's kind of extend this a little bit. First of all, let's do a prompt here. I'm going to kind of copy and paste some code so you don't see me typing for the whole webinar here. Here we go. So I'm going to send a message from the bot saying welcome. And then I'm going to do a prompt dialog and tell the user to make a choice. And I'm going to give it two different choices: to register a webinar or to speak at a webinar. And with this on option selected method that we still need to create, this is what's going to run once the user selects one of these options. So let's do that. Here we go. So we can get the option selected from the result here, and then we can do a switch statement based on what the user selected. And in the case of register, I'm just going to call a new dialog that we need to create called register dialog. Then after that, it's going to run this other message to resume. And I'll create that real quick. And all that's really going to do is just pretty much go back up here and wait for another response from the user. Now we need to create this register dialog. So let's go do that. In the dialogs, we'll create a new, add a new item. And from that template, it helps us out again where we can add a bot dialog. And I'm going to keep this fairly simple here, and I'm just going to send a message back to it, back to the user. All right, so hopefully that works, and we'll test it out. Some errors. Oh. Copy paste foo wasn't good there. There we go. And then our emulator, we'll just reconnect. I think it connected. There we go. So we got our prompt, our choice here, and we'll click register, and we got our message back. So let's say we want to send this back up to Azure. What we would do is on this project, we'll just right click and publish. And we'll just create a new app service. Just give it a name, webinar bot, to an existing resource group, and just click create. And this may take a couple of, maybe 1 or 2 minutes to deploy the resource to Azure, and then it's going to build our project and send it up to Azure. Here we go, starting to build. This is where we would usually go get some extra coffee or take a water break or something like that. Go, it's done, and it popped up this window. And it's the same kind of view that we saw when we ran locally, but we can see this running on Azure now. However, we can't really use the emulator for this just yet. There's a couple of things we need to add to it. Back in Azure, we need to tell it to we need to tell Azure that this endpoint here, this address, is actually a bot. It's not a website. So we will need to also create what is called a bot channels registration. Give that a name. Good. Put in our bot resource group. And the pricing tier, there's a free version available, which I'm going to use. And here in the messaging endpoint, this is what we would use our Azure website location. I'm going to turn applications insights off. And for that Microsoft app ID and password, I'm just going to create a new one. There's quite a few clicks for this. All right, so it gives us an app ID, and I'm going to save this off because we're going to use this a few times that you'll see. And create a password and do the same. There we go. And now I can fill these things in for what we just generated. And then we'll create it. And while that's deploying, there's another thing we need to do. We'll go back to that app service that we created. And we need to tell the app service to use the Microsoft app ID and the app password. So in the application settings, go down and we'll add a new setting, the Microsoft app ID. And then the password. And save that. All right, then we go back to our emulator and we'll get this location. We still need to add that API/messages to it. And if you thought we were done with that app ID and password, we have actually one more place we need to put those, since it's hosting on Azure. And let's see if this works. All right, it's connected. There we go. And we click register, and got the same experience that we did locally, but it's running in Azure now. So that's kind of how you can do that in C# with getting started with Visual Studio. So we'll go back to the slides here. All right, so there's that. And let's talk about extending the bot framework here. And I'm sure I kept mentioning the artificial intelligence and all that. And while we're not quite to a point where the bots are going to kind of talk to us the way as a human would, because there's, I think the kind of the small talk type of thing has yet to be perfected by the researchers and the AI people yet. But there are a lot of things you can do to make your bot a lot more intelligent. And if you play it right, it might seem like you're talking to a human. And a couple of things that Microsoft gives you to help out with that. And one of my favorite things that Microsoft offers are these cognitive services. And if you haven't seen these before, these are basically pre-built models, artificial intelligence models that Microsoft has built, and they made them available as either just a simple REST call, or they've also have them as SDKs themselves that make it a lot more easier to use within your applications. And a couple of things that, well, they do a lot of things for you, such as the vision service, which is where you can give it an image and they'll give you a description of it. And there's some where you can give it an image of a person's face, and if it's a celebrity, it can automatically detect who that is. Or you can also give it images of your own face and train it that is you. Then once you use that model, it'll detect your face and images. And there's also a custom vision service, which is really cool, and that allows you to do two things. You can do image classification, which is if you've seen that not hot dog thing that kind of made the rounds a while ago, you can build your own not hot dog app with that. So it'll tell you if an image has a hot dog in it or not. It can also do what is called object detection. So going with that same hot dog example, not only will it tell you that there's a hot dog in the image, it'll actually tell you where in the image that it is. And then you have the speech APIs, which do the usual kind of the text to speech or speech to text, and it'll also do speech translation and speech verification. So you can train your voice, it'll recognize your voice, and then you can implement that API, and it'll kind of verify you based on your voice. And you have search, where you can do some kind of news search or video search, image search, and stuff like that. Knowledge, which so far there's only one service within the knowledge APIs, and that's the Q&A service that we'll touch on in a couple of slides. Then you have the language, where it'll kind of detect what language you're speaking, and another service that is within the language is that we touched on before was the language understanding service, and this is probably going to be, I think probably most bots would definitely, or I would say all bots would benefit from having this. So you can have that natural language understanding within your bots. And then there's that Q&A maker. And what that is, it's a similar service to the language understanding, but it's a little bit different. And since you can supply the answers to different versions of questions, such as mainly people would send in their frequently asked questions into this, and you can send that and import those into the service. You can train it, and it will answer those questions for you without having your user to click around to several different pages to find those answers. And you can implement Azure Search to your bot, and Azure Search will allow you to navigate large amounts of content with things such as being able to search all that content with a keyword. And adding this to your bot can help your users find the content they need much faster than they can if they would have to navigate your site on their own. So if your bot needs to be data-driven, adding Azure Search would definitely help. And with all that, let's go into a quick demo where I'll create another bot with Azure using Node.js. I'm going to add text sentiment to it, and then we'll test that on the emulator. So I'm going to create this differently than we did within Visual Studio. I'm going to create it straight with Azure first. And to do that, we would create a web app bot. Let's give it a name, kind of the usual Azure questions here. I want it free. And with this one, it creates the app service for you. And you can specify what kind of template you want your bot to be. We used version 3 with the basic C# template. You can use version 4 if you want to, but I'm going to use Node with the basic template. And I can use Azure Storage, no application insights. And with this, I can just let it auto-create the app ID and password. Let that deploy for real quick. Usually it won't take but like a minute or so. I think this is deployed. I think I accidentally cleared the notification. So this is pretty similar to the app service that we had before. A couple of differences though. There we go. And that's not it. There we go. All right, here we go. So we see over here we have a couple of different things for our bot management. We have our channels here that we can connect it to. The thing I want to highlight here is this build tab. And we can download our source code, and we'll do that in a second. But I want to highlight this online editor, which I think is really cool. If there's something you need to edit to it, like really quick, like change some strings around or something, this is definitely going to be easier to use than doing it locally and then publishing it back up. And once again, it has kind of that Visual Studio code feel to it. Now app.js is where all the code is. So we can edit this inline, and it automatically saves. But I'm going to download this. All right, got that. Need to extract. You go and open this in Visual Studio Code. And here's that app.js here. So first of all, this is using that table storage here. I'm not using that, so I'm just going to go ahead and comment those out. So I want to use the cognitive services for this. And so what I would need to do is just install through npm the cognitive services package. And this gives me all those access to all those services. And while I'm here, I'm just going to npm install everything that they have. And while that's going, in order to use the text sentiment we also need an instance of the text analytics service. So we can go back to Azure and we can create that real quick and just enter in a name. And that also has a free version. But as you can see, I already have one created. So I'll be using that. Here we go. And so just add some code to access the cognitive services. So down here, need to create a client. We're going a new version, new instance of the cognitive services, and we're going to use that text analytics, and we're going to give it a API key and endpoint that we get when we create that instance of the text analytics service in Azure. And then we need to construct our what we're going to send to it. So we need to give it a header saying it's going to be JSON, and our body, we're going to give it a collection of documents, and just we're only sending one document with English language, and they made this service where it can give text sentiment on a lot of other different languages if you need to. A unique ID, and since we're using that session, this needs to go in here, and we're given the text as the whatever text that we send to the bot. And instead of just echoing back that text that we sent to it, we're going to call the sentiment on the text analytics, give it the header and the body, and then when that comes back, that's where we're going to send the score back to the user. Now I'm just going to run this locally, so I'm going to add in the app ID and password. And this I think is just blank. All right, that's good. And to run this, you just do node app.js. And I think it's going to fail because we need to add a couple more packages to it, which I'm not sure why it didn't install when I did npm install earlier. There's one more. And now it should run. All right, so now it's running. We'll go back to our emulator. And what was it? 3978. And once again, we need that app ID and password. And actually, I think I used the previous one to get this. Go back to the web app bot. And it's going to be in that same application settings that we had to add it into the other bot that we created. So here's the ID. And then the password. Good. All And let's hope this works. So get connected, and let's see. It's a great demo. There, come back with our sentiment, and we got a 96% sentiment on that, on this message here, which is quite a bit positive. If we do something else, like this demo is boring, you got a 5% sentiment, so it's going to be a bit more negative. And so if you want to publish this back, there's in the README here, all you need to do is run npm run Azure publish, and it goes straight back to the Azure bot there. So that was actually a lot easier to create the bot that way, I think, than creating it within Visual Studio and then publishing it within there. And as you can see, it was even easier to use the cognitive services within our bot. So it's definitely easy to add a lot of intelligence to it that you need. All right, so go back to the slides real quick. And before we end, a couple of resources so you can dive a bit further to it. The Bot Framework documentation is really good. You find a lot of code samples and scenarios and all that you would need. Microsoft has a Bot Framework lab, which kind of walks you through creating a bot, and I think it integrates Q&A service into it as well, so you can see how that works. And if you don't mind a plug here, the Wintellect Dev Center, I will be doing a lot more blog posts on the Bot Framework. There's already a couple on there on, let's see. Yeah, I think there's one on there to integrate a Luis model into your bot. So, and are there any questions? Let's see. Yeah, it is tied to Azure, so you would need to deploy to Azure there to use the Bot Framework. How to integrate with Facebook? So it's actually, it should be pretty easy in the channels here when you have it on Azure. You probably need to get some credentials from Facebook to do it, but there's a Facebook Messenger channel that you can connect to. And I don't have any of these to use. A resources slide, sure. And we will, actually before that, on GitHub, we have a, webinars repository, and I'll be putting the slides and that C# code, well, all the code, I'll be putting it on here. At least I'll be creating a pull request anyway. So, good. Make bots private. Yeah, there. You can put authentication into your bot. That should make it private. I'm not sure there's anything else you can do other than that. SharePoint integration. I know you can do it. I'm not sure if it's easy to do though. But I think there is some documentation on how to integrate into SharePoint. how can you train it and improve your bot? As part of the cognitive services, they have some experimental ones. It's called within the labs. And let's see, conversation learner, which is interesting. It gives you kind of a web UI where somebody who doesn't even code can go in there. They can type, they can interact with the bot, and they can kind of train it that way and make corrections and all that. And this is a great video to kind of give you an overview of what that is. But that's going to be a way that you can improve it over time. With authentication, could a user's AD group trigger different answers? Yes, I think you can put that in there. So when you authenticate within the bot, it should be able to capture all the information from Active Directory, and you can proceed depending on the information that you get back. Any more questions? And if you think of questions, after this webinar, once again, you are welcome to tweet at me, or I believe you should get an email following the webinar, and I believe you can just reply to that with questions. All right, I don't see any more questions. So again, if you think of more, just definitely reach out. I'll be glad to answer any more questions that come out afterwards. So I hope you all enjoyed the webinar and got at least kind of piqued your interest in creating some bots with the bot framework. So, and once again, if you're interested in building a Luis model, we have that webinar next month. Let's see. We have it next month on the 25th. So that should be hopefully an interesting one as well. So, all right, everyone. Thanks for joining, and I guess I'll hopefully see y'all next time.